I believe this is a pretty timely subject to talk about. We want to talk about fire prevention, and we've already got a a pretty serious fire year going on. I was looking at some statistics and saw that our fires, the number of acres that we burned in the country, are really already more than we had last year by a significant amount. We look at some of the events over the weekend. We see a major fire down in Millard County, other fires popping up here or there. And our experience with the trust is that we've had some serious fire losses, and those have come both from outside sources and other sources inside of our operations. And so we really think this is an important subject. And so we wanted to take the time to talk about that today. Fire is really, you know, that's the original peril that many of us are concerned about when we buy insurance on our homes. Some of us call it homeowners insurance now, but a lot of people just call it fire insurance, because that's the major thing that we're concerned about is, what if I have a total loss of my home? How do I move on? Ask yourself about that. How's your life been affected by fire? Have you had some close calls? Have you had loss from that? Each year in the U.S., we see about 1.3 million fires occur. About 3,500 deaths are caused by these fires, and about $22 billion in losses from fires in any given year. So it is a big deal. Here at the Trust, we're no different. We suffer fire losses every year. Normally it's in the neighborhood of about 20 different fires. And really, when we start talking losses, we're looking at nearly $1 million a year when it comes to fire losses. So this is not a small amount of the property losses that we see come through the Trust. So it's a big deal. Where do the fires come from? We really look internal and external. The internal, you know, those are things that we think about, our housekeeping, our dumb things that we do. We light a candle and leave it unattended, or we have an electrical problem inside of the building. And there's the external sources where we have where we're interfacing with wildland. You think about the state of Utah and the members of the Trust, we cover a lot of different environments, a lot of different habitats that are out there, and some of those place us right in the wild. They place us in areas where we have trees or vegetation up close to our buildings. And so if a wildland fire happens, it can get to our buildings unless we've done some work to prevent it. And so we got to think of, what are our risks? And we'll get into that a little bit more in just a minute. We just want to talk about some basics. What does it take to make a fire? Well, we have the traditional fire triangle that we talk about. And we talk about heat, fuel, and oxygen. It's something an ignition source gets with a fuel that has oxygen in the environment. Well, oxygen, we really don't have a whole lot of control over. There's 20.9% oxygen in the air around us. Oxygen's there. Then we have the ignition source, and we have the fuel. Those are the things that we can really control when we're out there. So let's talk about what are fuels. Fuel is really everywhere. If you take a look around you, look out your window, is there some fuel out there? What condition is it in? Is it in great condition, ready to burn? As the summer moves on and things get hotter and drier, that fuel will become more and more combustible and ready to go. And so let's talk about the difference between combustibles and flammables. Combustible are things that will burn. These are normal things that we have around us. Just the paper that we have on our desk, it's combustible. It will burn and it will sustain combustion. What's the difference between that and flammable? Well, it's how easily it will catch on fire. So when we talk about common combustibles, we talk paper, paper and cardboard. Pallets are a really bad source of combustibles that can cause fires and make us lose our buildings. And just normal junk that can hang around our buildings, our offices, can be those combustibles that can cause or that can really contribute to a fire. When we move up to flammables, these are things, and particularly flammable liquids, they are things that can have a flash point less than 100 degrees Fahrenheit. That means if I put a spark to it and it has 100 degrees or it is less than 100 degrees Fahrenheit, it can burst into flames. So things like gasoline, alcohols, and in that same category, hand sanitizer is a flammable liquid. No practicing on any of these things. We don't need any fires today because of the training. But things like paints and thinners and other chemicals that we may have around can be flammables, and they're just that much more susceptible to fire. We also have flammable gases that we may be using in our operations or to heat our buildings. Acetylene is an important gas that we use in a cutting torch. Propane may be used to heat our building. We may use it for fuel on a forklift, or various different ways we can use that, but it's highly flammable. And so if we get a spark around that stuff in contact with it, we're going to have a fire. Talking about these materials, can we store these things in a cage like this? Put them outdoors. Don't store those things in our building. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead. Getting to the point where we want to talk about controls while I'm still talking about what the risks are. Oxidizers. Oxidizers don't burn, but they support combustion. So like I said, we've got 21% oxygen in the air that we stand in. That's enough to support combustion in most cases. However, if we add extra oxygen as an oxidizer, it will make things burn that don't normally burn, or make those things burn really hot. If you think of that oxyacetylene torch that's out there, if you just turn on the acetylene and ignite that torch, it will have a kind of yellow flame, doesn't burn very well, and there's black soot that will come off of it. But as soon as I turn that oxygen on, if I adjust it right, it'll go to a nice blue, hot flame. And so thinking about oxidizers, well, if I have an oxygen leak, that can accentuate the possibility that we have a bad fire. And it's not just an oxyacetylene torch. Medical oxygen that many of us may use because we do EMS response, or we have somebody working in our facility that's using supplemental oxygen because of a medical condition. Well, these things can contribute to fires. And we just saw recently a fire in an apartment complex in Salt Lake City, where the cause of that fire was smoking associated with oxygen use. So if you get oxygen in bedding or clothing or something like that, and then we get a spark there, it can burst into flame much more easily than it would if I just put a match on it without the oxygen in place. Okay. So we talked about oxidizers, we talked about fuels. Let's talk ignition sources. What are the things out there that can cause fires or ignite fires? And so anytime we've got an open flame, well, what could those be? Well, we could be burning, we could have candles, we could have pilot lights. You know, if we have a gas-fired water heater, or stoves in our buildings that are gas fired, we have open flames. There are other things. Hot work like grinding or welding can cause sparks. Friction. Anytime I move one part over another and it's not a good lubricated surface there, it can produce friction and can cause heat. It can cause sparks. Something like chains dragging, safety chains on a trailer can cause sparks. And last year, I know they had a big blitz on making sure your chains weren't dragging, because sparks could fly off as you're driving down the freeway and ignite fires on the side of the road. Static electricity and electricity itself are other common causes of fires or ignition sources for fires. If I turn a light switch on or off, I'm making a spark. And if there happened to be a flammable gas in the area, I might ignite that just by flipping the switch if I have a propane leak in the building. But just think about those ignition sources. Static electricity is all around us. If I drag my feet along the floor, along the carpet, or climb in and out of my car, I develop a static charge. And if I touch something, there will be a spark that would be sufficient to ignite a flammable liquid or a flammable gas in the air. All right. Just want to throw a couple other things in here. Fireworks are another source of fires that we have, and we made it through the 4th of July weekend without a ton of fires, but they happened. Mike Stagg, that's on here today, had the opportunity to almost get evacuated from his house over the 4th of July weekend, Independence Day, because they determined that was fireworks related, didn't they, Mike?
They haven't determined yet, but that's like they're 90% sure that's what it was.
Pretty good plan. It was based on when the fire happened and the location and all of those things. So fireworks are a big deal, and so we need to look at that, what our local ordinances are and what those controls are and where they should be. What should we do as an organization? Many of you out there are determining where and when those fireworks can be set off. But what about shows? We might be actually putting those fireworks shows on. And I think that's probably a good way to do that. People want to see fireworks, and maybe if we can do it in a controlled environment, that's more safe than just having everybody going out and doing it on their own. Well, if we do fireworks shows and we bring a contractor in to set those off, which I think is the better way to go, make sure that we have an adequate contract with them and a certificate of insurance to ensure that they have coverage to back them up. What if our staff are shooting off our fireworks? Well, they need to be certified shooters. There is a training program through the State Fire Marshal's office where they can become certified shooters to do that. But they need some training and some experience to go along with that. And then we need to build our controls into that. All right, I want to just take a little bit, stop for just a second and take a little different angle. Your fire risks are yours. Your facility, your location is very, very unique. You think, I live up in the Cache Valley, and even though we had a fire in the mountains there over the weekend, most of the valley still looks pretty green. Well, I'm headed down to St. George after I get done with the webinar today, and I'm going to see some very different environments as I get there. It's supposed to be 107 in St. George. Well, that fire risk in St. George is a heck of a lot different than it is in Cache Valley. However, the fuel is also very different in the Washington County area than it is in the Cache County. So your risks to your organization, your fire risks are very unique, and you need to stand back and look at those and determine what are our risks and what do we need to do to prevent those things. If you've got your public works shop set up out in the salt flats, out in the desert there, and there's no fuel anywhere around, well, your risk is very, very low from external sources. So the fire risks that you're going to look at are your internal sources. How are we going to end up lighting our own building on fire? However, you may be working or have your facilities in an area where you have a lot of vegetation growth. And as temperatures increase and humidities go down and we don't get rain, those are a particular risk to you. So just just realize that your risks are very specific to you, and you need to know what those are and take the proper steps. Okay, fire prevention. This is an important, this is really what we're going to be talking about today, are the steps that we'll take in fire prevention. Having a plan in place. And just a reminder, I won't go into the OSHA requirements for this, but this is an OSHA requirement that we have a fire prevention plan, as well as our emergency action plan, or the plan that determines how do we evacuate our building and deal with those things. They can be the same plan. You can put all of that into the same thing. But this really says, how do we prevent fires, and what do we do if a fire does happen? We outline our evacuation routes, where we're going to muster our people. What if we have to evacuate the area? Now, Mike almost got evacuated here a week ago, or a little bit more. And Mike, if you're there, what was going through your mind when the fire department or the law enforcement rolls through your neighborhood and says, "You're on notice"?
Oh, it was it was crazy. I mean, the fire department comes rolling through, knocks on our door, says we're on notice for being evacuated anytime soon. The fire was about 2 blocks from my house, and they're saying, you could be evacuated, be prepared. And this is like 11:30 at night. My kids are sound asleep. My wife's already asleep. And it's just me awake. Like, do I wake up my wife? Do I wake up the kids? I mean, what do I do? I mean, everyone knows you don't wake up the kids, but
Yeah.
it was very stressful. As you're just sitting there not knowing, and you're just smelling the fire, and you're looking out your window and you can see it burning, on what you're going to do. Luckily, my family and I have a plan on what we would do if something like this were to happen, but it was still super stressful.
Yeah, you start thinking about, okay, if we have to evacuate,
what's important?
What's important? What am I taking?
Yeah.
The kids, right? We gotta take the kids with us, but beyond the kids, what is it that's important, and have we made plans? Well, the same goes for our workplace. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate that. Same goes for our workplace. If we have to be evacuated, what's the critical stuff that we need? And it's a lot better to do that when the fire isn't on our doorstep, to make those plans, when we can sit back and say, oh, here's what we need. And all of these things have a home component to it. If you were faced with an evacuation, what would you want to secure from your home? Well, for a lot of us, we probably have some important paperwork, photos, or things like that. Well, are those located in an area where we can find those, and are they portable? Do we have them in a container or a condition in which we can just grab and go? Do we have a go bag set up that has information? All right. And other critical things are training our staff. What's our policy? Can we use a fire extinguisher? And you need to make a decision on that. And there are good arguments both ways, whether we want to use fire extinguishers or just tell our people to evacuate. Well, we need to set the rules by having a plan in place. Okay. Well, fire prevention. Here's a list of the categories that we're going to go through, the things that we're going to talk about. Some of these are policies. We need to set an open flame policy. And you know what my open flame policy is? None. If I'm working in a workplace, I don't want to have candles. I don't want to have open flames. I don't want to have people making fancy dinners or fancy meals and doing flambe. We don't want to have that. We're a workplace. We don't want to take chances on those things. Now, some things we may make exceptions to that. Hey, we're going to be welding. We're going to be making sparks. We're going to do grinding. But in those situations, we build a policy around that. When and where can we use those? And we'll talk about hot work here in a minute. Smoking is always a potential for fire. So we've got to control where and when and how that takes place. So I want to have a designated location. Those designated locations where smoking takes place should really be cleared of all combustible materials. I want to have collection facilities for cigarette butts and other materials that might be out there, so they don't just get thrown out into the weeds or into a trash can somewhere and potentially start a fire. So let's make it easy for those folks out there that smoke to be more safe when it comes to fire. All right. Other things, space heaters, barbecue grills. We don't talk a lot about barbecue grills, but they are a source of many fires. And sometimes these happen at fire stations. Firefighters are there, they're cooking their dinner, they've got the barbecue grill going, and then they get called out to a call somewhere and forget to turn off the barbecue grill. That can be a real disaster. And as a matter of fact, a lot of fire stations have an automatic shut off on their barbecue grill based on timer, based on alarm. And so let's look at that. What location is our barbecue grill in? And let's place that where it's away from combustible materials. And then look at regular maintenance for our equipment, HVAC equipment, other pieces of equipment out there that does have the potential to cause fires, especially stuff that's not really observable, things that are on top of the building, all of those things. Do we have a contract with a contractor or our own in-house PMs that we go out and make sure that equipment is in good shape? What about open burning? Depending on what part of the state you're in, this may be a regular practice to go out and burn weeds, to clear ditch banks, to clear areas of debris out there. Here's my general rule for that: don't do it. We've run into some significant issues with fires with open burning where it's gotten away from trust member agencies and burned other people's property. So in general, don't do it. However, if you decide to do that, you need to have controls in place. Now, there's a permitting system that you have to get a burn permit. There's a clearing index, and that permit system is only for certain parts of the year and based on air quality and all of those things. We've got to be smart about the weather. If the wind is blowing like crazy towards the subdivision next door, don't light the fire, and have sufficient people in place and controls in place. It's just like real estate: location, location, location. There might be a place where it makes sense to light a fire. But there are a lot of places where it makes absolutely no sense to do that. So in general, no open burning. If you do that, make sure we've got controls in place. I have to have extinguishing agents, sufficient people to control that. Back burns or clearing combustibles from edges, so I can control that. And is the fire department, what's their response time, and are they accessible? Sometimes having the fire department participate in that if they're part of our operation. Hot work programs. I won't spend much time on this because I just did a webinar on it about 3 or 4 months ago where we talked about hot work. And basically, if I'm doing anything that's causing heat, sparks, flames, I can't do that without a permit. We need a system in place to control when and where and how all that stuff happens, and that we have fire watches and appropriate controls, because we don't want to burn our building down because we sent a contractor up on the roof to work on our HVAC system and we didn't have controls in place. So this should also control those contractors as well. So just FYI on that, I did a webinar on it. If you're watching on YouTube, there'll be a link somewhere here. And And you can just go to our YouTube channel and check out that hot work program. Storage of materials, it can be one of the big contributing factors to fires. So in general, we want to reduce our storage, reduce the amount of combustibles that we have. Let's stand back and go, when's the last time we used this or that, and get rid of it. This picture that in here, we have a stack of pallets. If you have pallets out there, ask yourself, are we ever going to use those? If the answer is no, get them out of there now. Let's get rid of those things. A pile of pallets is a great way to start a fire, is a great way to lose your building. In the interim, before I can get rid of those, make sure those pallets are not stored near anything that we don't want to burn, particularly your building. Look at where that storage goes. All right. So, and just in general on that, where do we want to store combustibles? If I'm using pallets, I have to have some out there. Well, I don't want to place those next to the building. I'm going to put those out on a concrete pad or on some gravel, something out there where the chance of them coming in contact with the fire or the consequences of them catching on fire are not nearly as great. Think about the types of things that we're storing. Just did a risk assessment at an organization here in the last couple of weeks, and they had a massive amount of tires. They said, yeah, we've had a hard time getting tires, so we bought a bunch of tires to put in there. Well, tires are a huge combustible load. And so where do we want to store those if we need those? Number one, ask yourself, what do I need? If you're going to the tire shop to get all of your tires repaired, well, maybe you don't need any on hand, or we need a reduced number on hand. If I do need to store those types of things, plastics, tires, big quantities of paper or cardboard, where do I want to store that? Well, I don't want to put that inside of my multi-million-dollar building that I have, because the chances that I lose that entire building based on a fire getting into this stuff goes way up. So can I store those out in an outlying shed somewhere to prevent or to reduce the risk to my very valuable building? Fuels. So gasoline should be dispensed outside of our building, even when I'm talking small quantities of that. I'm filling up a chainsaw or a trimmer. All of that should be done outside of the building, because if a spill happens, there could be a spark there, and suddenly a very small fire can turn into a very large fire. So do our fuel handling in the appropriate locations, ensure that I've got fire extinguishers in place and all of that. Flammable gases, and particularly I'm talking about propane. Let's store those cylinders outside of the building. And some of you may say, well, how am I going to store that outside the building? Somebody will steal it. Well, early in the presentation, we had a picture of that cage where you can put your cylinders in there, and you can put a lock on them and keep people and bolt the thing down so people can't walk off with those. But let's limit or eliminate storage of propane inside of our buildings. You get a leak in a cylinder, not only can you have a fire and lose your building, but you can have a massive explosion that can devastate an entire community. And here's one that I would encourage you to do as well, and that's the hoarder intervention. Some of you out there might have somebody working in the organization that has a tendency to collect things, and they've been collecting things for a long time, and we've got a lot of junk, and we have housekeeping issues, and this is not just a fire issue. This is a safety issue for trips and you name it. We can go down the line of all the problems of just hoarding stuff. If there's stuff there that we haven't used, that we're never going to use, get rid of it, throw it away. Donate it, whatever the appropriate route is. Let's just get rid of those materials because it puts us at risk, particularly if we have combustibles or flammables there. Let's do an intervention and clear out the hoarding that we have. Storage of flammable liquids and flammable aerosols. Make sure that we have a flammable storage cabinet for all of those flammable materials. And as you can see in here, they're using OSHA safety cans under OSHA. That's what we should be using to dispense our fuels. They have some controls in there to prevent fires, to prevent flame from going back inside the container. It's also made of metal, so it can withstand exposure to flame. Okay, big area of concern. This is our landscaping, the areas around our buildings. If I could give you an assignment today, I would give you the assignment to go walk your facilities and take a look at what the risk is from fire. Right now, we're in July. We've got a couple of months of real potential for fires. As you look around your facilities, is there dry grass? Do you have junipers up against your buildings or close to your buildings? If you've ever seen a juniper tree catch on fire, you'll realize that it's not just a small thing. They get extremely hot, and it's almost an explosion as they catch on fire when the heat is high and the humidity is low. So if I have those things, let's look really seriously about that and say, is this landscaping necessary? It's right next to the building, and we're putting a real risk of having a fire. So if we can go out and remove as much as we possibly can, as we landscape our buildings, think about that. What can I put around there that would reduce the chance that if a fire started in the area, that it could get to our buildings? So, you know, the trend right now, all the rage is xeriscape. Well, we can also use that to reduce the risk of fire in our buildings. So let's reduce the fuels that we have around. Think fire breaks or buffers. Just imagine as you walk around your building today that there's a fire on the horizon and it's coming towards your building. What could we do to produce a fire break or a buffer around our building to prevent a fire from running into us? We have had facilities of trust members where we've lost it due to a wildfire coming through and burning that up. And you know, I think back to one, we lost a water tank. We could have gone out there and reduced the amount of fuel in the area ahead of that. So when the wildfire came through, it would just burn around the water tank. Didn't necessarily need to have any of that vegetation growing out there. Think about your irrigation systems. Can those be used in the event of fires to help reduce the chance that your buildings get affected? Electrical is always a risk when it comes to fires. So we want to look and be doing regular maintenance on those things. Inspect where your wires are going, where if I have a pole and wires coming down to it, does it go through vegetation? If it does, let's get the appropriate people out there to trim back that vegetation or remove it, would be better. Inspect all of our electrical equipment. In some cases, if you're using 480 volts or more, periodically go out and look with an infrared camera to see if we've got hot spots, if we've got things that aren't working quite the way they should. Cords are always a problem. If you've got an extension cord, let's make sure that thing is used only for temporary purposes, and I don't have extension cords going outside, going through doors or up into attics or into another room. That puts us at real risk. If we need electrical somewhere, let's get an electrician and install the appropriate circuit there. Battery backups can be risky for fire. So maybe you work in an office and your IT folks came in, they put a battery backup. I've got one under my desk. Sometimes question why I have that. I've got a laptop. If the power goes out, I got at least a few hours that I can just keep working on the laptop. A battery backup, I've seen many of these heat up, melts. I've seen several of them catch on fire. So think about that. Battery backup under your desk. Don't put your recycle bin next to or on top of your battery backup. That's a great way to have a fire. Let's see, space heaters are a real risk. Now, right now, it's going to be 100 degrees over most of the state today. We're not thinking about space heaters, but in about 3 or 4 months, we're going to be dragging those things out because it's chilly. Let's have a policy around those that they need to be approved, which means that they need to be properly grounded, have the third prong on it. Have a tip over protection. So if that battery or that space heater tips over, it will turn off and not keep putting out heat and catch the carpet on fire. And I like to have a rule in there that when you're not at your desk, that space heater better be turned off. And if we find it's not turned off, then I think it should be removed and not allowed back there. Space heaters are great. We don't say eliminate those because sometimes they're a really necessary thing, but they're also a really easy way to burn your building down. Don't be running those things where I've got a lot of combustibles, and let's just be smart about it. And one last thing on electrical, unplug it. If I'm not using it, I'm not going to be using it for a while, unplug it. If I've got an extension cord, unplug it. I see as I walk through shops, a lot of times there'll be an extension cord just out there, maybe hanging up in a nice coil, but it's plugged in. There's a chance that thing will fail. If it's not being used, unplug it. Fire suppression is a really important thing as well, whether it is a sprinkler or a fire extinguisher. So how do we make sure that it works when it needs to be? Make sure our contractors are coming out on a regular basis, at least annually, and looking at the suppression system, both the fire extinguishers as well as our sprinkler systems. Ensure that those inspections are done by our people as well, so we make sure they're accessible and that they're in good condition. Any of these sprinkler systems should be monitored by an alarm system. So if we have impairment on that system, we need to have a fire watch in place for that. All right. Oh, and on your sprinklers, we need to keep the materials stored below those sprinkler heads, so at least 18 inches below, so the sprinklers can work adequately. And don't store materials so it will block the fires or the sprinkler water from getting down there. Let's give our sprinklers the best chance we can to work appropriately. And access is super important. If the fire department can't get to the standpipe, that's the little connections on the outside of your building, if you have a sprinkler system, if they can't get to those or they're plugged up because there were caps on it and somebody stole the caps and people were sticking pop cans up in there, that is a terrible thing to have a system and not have it working. So once again, get out there and inspect those things. When it comes to fire extinguishers, same thing. We inspect those on at least a monthly basis, and then have the contractors come out once a year and take a look at those. Make that decision. Are we going to fight fires or are we not? Make the decision and stick with that. And if you decide to do that, make sure that all the staff are trained on how to use that. And I also have another, I'll probably try to, if I can figure out how to link it there. There will be another webinar out there on properly using fire extinguishers. Just a couple of thoughts on this, on those inspections of those equipment, of the different types of emergency equipment, as well as boilers, pressure vessels. Put these all onto a master calendar and an inventory. Tag these things so that we know whether it's location or the individual equipment themselves, so we know where they are. Just doing a risk assessment this last week, and we found a fire extinguisher that hadn't been, let's see, I can't remember what the date was. It was 6 or 8 years since it had been inspected by a contractor, and all the rest of them in the building were done. it had just been missed. Okay.
Jason, that's a great point, because I had the same thing with the fire extinguisher last week, and it had been, or 2 weeks ago, excuse me, it had been 10 years.
10 years
that thing had been inspected.
And
was the other ones had, so just making sure that they all get hit.
And that's why I like an inventory system. And so you've got a list. So when this fire extinguisher contractor comes out, you give them a list and hopefully a facility plan. But if not, at least a list with a description on it, so they can go out and chase that stuff down. Okay. I've got some resources, and I'm actually going to add to this. It was just a big ugly slide. Try to add some resources there. There's some tools out there that can help if you're in the planning parts of fire protection. There's this fire adapted community self-assessment tool that will kind of give you an idea. We have some great resources from Utah State government on the wildfire risk assessment portal. It'll tell you just how risky it is where you are. There's some maps on there and all kinds of great materials. So just in summary here, like I said, your risks are your risks, and you may be at extremely elevated risk of fire today, based on temperature and weather and all of those things. Let's take action today and make sure that we're reducing the risk of fire to our facilities, to our people, to our vehicles, and all of those things. One angle I didn't take on that, on equipment, when I was talking about that can be mobile equipment as well. So chainsaws and ATVs and all of those things. Make sure the spark arresters are in place and that they're in good condition for that. So plan and prepare for your risks, and take the time to check that on a periodic basis, and then you'll be ready when and if a bad thing happens. And we're facing a rough summer, but I think we can do it if we get our mind straight and put our efforts towards it. So folks, if you got questions or comments, please type those into the chat box and we will answer those at this time. Jeff and Mike, anything I missed or anything we should add?
I think it was great. Oh, go ahead, Jeff.
Mike. We had a question early on. Are the rules for storage the same for combustibles versus flammables?
No, they are not. Did you want to answer that one, Jeff?
No, go ahead.
Yeah. So really good question. So, and rules for storage are based on the type of occupancy. If you're a warehouse, there will be different rules than an office building. But really what we look at for flammables, flammable liquids need to be stored in a flammable storage cabinet. And those should be grounded, and technically they're supposed to be ventilated as well. But we want to have and self-closing door, all of that. Fuel storage has specific requirements there. One of the best resources that you can get with that is your local fire marshal. You can get in contact with them. Most of the time they're going to be doing an annual inspection of your facilities. We're definitely willing to help out there, but you've got your local fire marshal that knows the codes forwards and backwards, and they can help you out on those. Combustibles, the storage requirements for those may be a little reduced versus what we see in flammables. But like we talked, if I put a high concentration or a high combustible load of materials in an area, that can be just as bad as a flammable material if I have sufficient quantity of it. So, all right. Any other? I'm seeing. I can't see the chats, but I can see there's been some chatting going on.
It's mostly just Jeff imparting his vast wisdom on us all. So,
Awesome.
Well, and I'd like to add to that too. For those of you that are out there that represent communities, when a disaster happens, and I'm sort of changing the focal point here for just a minute, when a disaster happens, often it is your community buildings that end up being the focus of how you are able to rescue your community. People might need it for places where they can stay temporarily as shelters. You might need it for a morgue. You might need it for your base of operations and coordination, all of those things. And so in my career in risk management for public entities, I've always made it an emphasis that we look to increasing how hardy our buildings are, even if it goes a little bit above and beyond code. One example of that is you might have an older building that you're using for your city hall or a rec center. Well, maybe it's time to take a look at how your sprinklers and the gas lines coming into that building are braced. Are they now up to the standards of today to help keep those lines from breaking, whether it's the gas line causing a fire inside the building or a water line, which would make the building so that it's really not usable after an earthquake. Another great way to help prevent fire after an earthquake is what's called the seismically activated gas shutoff valve. They're $2,000–3,000 for a commercial building to purchase and then have installed. And they essentially, with an earthquake, will shut down the flow of gas into your building. And so all that's left is what's already in your building, because oftentimes the worst loss in an earthquake is the fire that follows the earthquake from the gases that are inside of your building. So take a look at those in your buildings and see if there's ways that you can harden those buildings in those ways to make them more usable and less of a fire risk themselves. One other comment, if you have a building and you're realigning walls, you may need to realign your sprinklers as well. You don't want to have a sprinkler head that's designed to be in the center of a room right next to a wall. It makes it less effective. It changes the area that it can get. It also may make it so that that sprinkler head is susceptible to damage from the vibrations of the building that come through the walls. I had a loss at my former employer where they did that. They put a sprinkler right next to a wall because they built the wall where the sprinkler was. Eventually, the vibrations from the HVAC system etched and broke the little glass, and we had a flood loss that poured down 4 floors. So just keep those things in mind as you're adjusting your buildings.
Thanks, Jeff. That's great information. And I had something really good that I was going to add to that, and I totally lost it. Anyway, so yeah.
Just a comment from the chat room that Jeff Hermanson mentions that most of these things that we talked about today should be practiced at home as well. I mean, absolutely. I think that's a fantastic point, is that the things that we talked about here don't just apply to work, right, or our office.
Absolutely.
Using these same best practices at home is definitely going to help us. Yeah,
for sure. 100% agree with that. And so as I encourage you to go and look at your facilities today, to look at the conditions inside and outside, do the same thing at home. Mm-hmm. Those are simple things. Clear the vegetation around our homes. That if I've got some dry vegetation there that may cause or may contribute to a fire, get rid of it. Let's take the time to prepare our buildings, prepare our homes, so we don't have those issues. Well, awesome, folks. Thank you so much. Is that everything, Mike?
Yep, that's good.
Hey, well, just a final word on this. It just goes along with that. Today's the day. We're right in the middle of it now, of fire season. Today's the day. Let's take some action. Walk out and do some things. If they're easy things, I can clear the stuff from in front of the fire extinguisher. I can throw away the trash that's out. Clear the trash out. There's that pile of pallets. I can get rid of it. Other stuff may take more work. Hey, we've got a lot of storage here. We really need to install a sprinkler system. Well, let's put it on the list. Let's put it on the capital improvement and start working towards those things, because this doesn't happen by accident. The good things that we need to do need to be intentionally done. So let's come together with a plan and make it happen. And if every one of us take an action today, we're gonna prevent some fires. Thanks, folks. Appreciate all you do, and go out and have a safe day.